One of our big stories we're following this morning is north of our borders. Let's talk about Zimbabwe. It's supposed to be one-day voting. There was no chance of that happening because of delay yesterday. So it is continuing in Zimbabwe this morning, this after polling stations in big cities like Harare and Bulawayo were having some problems. The delays, we understand, it was a shortage of ballot papers and indelible ink. It's that little ink they put on your finger, of course, after you have voted. So let's find out what the state of play is at the moment. Political analyst Misheck Mugabe making time for me this morning. Misheck, hello to you. Good to have you on ENCA. What are you hearing coming out of Zimbabwe? Do you think voting could be wrapped up today? Good morning, Misheck.
Morning. How are you? I want to say good morning to ENCA viewers at home. Look, the elections in Zim, are a shame. I say this because it cannot be that on the day of voting, the Electoral Management Body, the Zimbabwe Election Commission, will say in some of the polling stations there are no, ballot papers. In some of the polling stations there is a mix-up of candidates. And in some of the polling stations, polling, started in the middle of the day and at times at the end of the day. It cannot be, because what it does is that it causes voter apathy. Because when people stay in a queue for far too long, whilst they are not being able to vote, they are being told stories. It means that they might be discouraged and go home and not be able to vote. But interestingly, for your viewers of ENCA, if you look at the situation, you'll find out that this has been happening mostly in urban, polling stations in Harare and in Bulawayo. But polling stations that are mostly in rural parts of the country, ballot papers were available in time. But if you check the offices of electoral management bodies, they are situated in urban areas where then it should be easier to dispatch, ballot papers in time to polling stations. But that did not happen. So it should be a worrisome, development. And it's something that is, undesirable. That polling that should happen within a day. Many people could not vote. They could not finish a vote. The extension of the voting by another day, it might not really assist, in terms of clearing the mess that has been, shown by the electoral management body, because most of the voters would have been, having other commitments. Some of them, would have been given one day off at work because they are voting, on the 23rd of August. And some of the employers might not give you any further time to vote on the following day because you must go back to work. So
some opposition members, Misheck, are saying that this is being done deliberately by ZANU-PF to delay so that voters, as to your point, go home. They have to get back to work. Many of them are elderly in rural areas. They can't stay all day to cast their vote. Do you think it's a ploy by the ZANU-PF? What do you make of the opposition's claims that it's because ZANU-PF is doing this deliberately?
No, there can be such possibilities. You know why? Because ZANU-PF, is the one that is in charge of most of the state institutions, including the election management board. Most of the people there were appointed by ZANU-PF, and therefore most of them listen to what ZANU-PF would have wanted, them to do. But what is most said, about these elections, is that even some of the opposition leaders are incarcerated. Job Sikala is in prison as we speak, who is one of the key figures in the opposition politics in Zimbabwe. Jacob Ngarivume is in prison as we speak. Who is a key figure in the opposition politics in Zimbabwe. And I'm saying, I hope the SADC observers and all the observer missions are able to see this clearly, that these elections, I think they are not free, they are not fair, and a lot, has been done to discourage voters from participating in the elections. But a lot has been done as well, to ensure that it favors, the incumbent. Because the incumbent in an election always have an advantage, of managing processes and being in charge of process. But really, the fact that these elections were not managed properly, demonstrating that the election management board is not ready, is not prepared, disadvantages, some of the political players, in the game. So I do think that some of the claims, there might be some elements of truth to those claims because the intention probably is to favor the incumbent.
Very, very briefly, Misheck, I need to let you go. Do you foresee, and I hope it's not the case, do you foresee violence as a result of this alleged vote rigging and interference by ZANU-PF? Obviously, we all hope not, but what's your reading on the temperature on the ground?
Yeah, if you want to analyze violence, election violence in Zimbabwe, you must look in the context of previous elections. I can tell you the last elections, if you remember, there were people who were killed by, the soldiers who were deployed in the streets. The Kgalema Mohlande report, which was released, shows that the state has been highly, involved, and many people were killed, and the report even recommended that they must be compensated. So that is the election violence. There is a history of election violence in Zimbabwe. In 2009, 2008 elections, during that runoff, if you remember, many people were killed, many people lost their lives. So now there can be a possibility of violence as well, because I think people are tired on the ground. Unemployment is very high in Zim. The levels of poverty are very high. Inflation is very high. And I don't think that under normal circumstances, people will vote for the continuation of their suffering. There is no normal thinking person who can vote for the continuation of their suffering. So therefore, the election results would have been expected to be a true reflection, of the plight of the ordinary people, poor masses of the people on the ground. So I do think that the attitude of the state really is what determines whether there will be violence or not on the ground, because people by nature cannot just be violent without being provoked. But when they are provoked, you know the concept that says violence against violence is not violence, it's self-defense. So we hope that the state will really respect the wills of the people. We hope that the results will be announced in due time. We hope that there will be no rigging schemes that will be done to ensure that it favors certain people in these elections.
Well, that is certainly the hope, Misheck. I appreciate your time. I think the entire continent, the entire world is hoping, exactly as you say, that the will of the people will prevail in the end. Misheck, I appreciate your time. Thank you, sir. I'm sure we'll talk again. What was supposed to be now the counting of the votes in Zimbabwe is actually now running into a second day of voting, and all for those reasons that Misheck Mugabe, was talking about. Interference and vote rigging is the accusation from many corners. Hopefully, it doesn't become violent up in Zimbabwe.